So yeah, you've had such an all-encompassing career when it comes to creativity and advertising. For 35 years, you worked on print campaigns, video campaigns, art direction, other stuff, copywriting, all those things. That creates a very eclectic bunch of creative talents, right? And fusing all that together into one podcast is going to be a challenging thing, but let's just get right down into it. Okay. My first question to you is, in an age of generalization where everyone knows something about everything, right? What is the role of a specialist? Do you think specialists in creativity still have a firm hold as they once did, or is that changing? What do you think about that?
Well, boy, it's a good question. So I think there's space for both specialists and generalists. But for sure, you have to have areas of specialization. There has to be certain things that you're very, very good at. One of the things that I talk about a lot today, there's an article or two out there where I talk about this, but because it's a hot button for me, is, the Adobe Creative Platform, which is, something that most creatives use on a very regular basis, has 22 programs at last count, 22 separate programs that somebody like me has access to and can use for any aspect of what somebody asks me for. That's just creative software. That's not management software. That's not your Outlook. It's not your Google Docs. It's not all the other software that you use. So if you look at art directors, designers, editors, you have to be really great at a few of them in order to be successful. So if you are, terrific at Adobe Premiere and After Effects, that makes you a real strong person in the video space. But if you're really good at Adobe Animate, which is it's the latest iteration of what once was Flash, if you don't use that program on a regular basis, you're never going to be good at it. So people who are really good at Animate are doing a lot of web-based animation, but they're not working so strongly in the video space, or if they are, they're dividing their skill set. So, so I don't know anybody who knows the entire Adobe suite really well. Usually when I see someone on someone's resume, I see somebody say Adobe Creative Suite, and their knowledge is like they know the suite. I usually laugh because I know that I
made that mistake as well until you corrected me.
There's probably 5 or 6 they're really good at, but they don't know 22 programs really, really well because the depth of some of them is extraordinary.
Right. Yeah. Also because some of the programs on there are all.
Did I answer the question?
That summed it up wonderfully. I think this new format is going to kick off better than expected. Yeah, that's true because on the Creative Cloud, there's also stuff like Dreamweaver and programs to make websites which require coding. Not something that many creatives intuitively know, right? Coding is a skill that you pick up on the side if you at all have interest in it. But coming back to sort of to extrapolate on this question further, right? There used to be a time when, say, you were in school, right, where you went to art school, right, and you learned a bunch of different things. I'm assuming from painting and different styles of producing art for different canvases. I don't know, right? Yeah. And now it's all gone digital, right? Do you think raw skills on the canvas or just drawing skills or sketching skills, do they translate into digital success or no?
Wow, that's a good question. So yes, they definitely translate in specific areas. There's still room for people who think in illustration, think in terms of fine art, because very often a creative idea could revolve around the style of art, what the visuals look like and translating the visuals and making them look different. So, with the burgeoning capabilities of Photoshop and Illustrator, and I don't know if people know what a Wacom tablet is, but it's
I don't know what that is.
A Wacom tablet is a pressure-sensitive tablet that has a pencil. So instead of using a mouse,
I see those. Yeah.
So if you have that sensitivity and those skills, those can be brought to bear. They're just not an everyday. They're not an everyday skill inside an agency, but there are people who make a living who would have once painted or drawn art who now are digital illustrators making a lot of money, who are licensed or contracted by agencies or in-house agencies or corporations to create art for them. And a lot of times that work is done digitally. So there's no question that the fine art skill is transferable, but it isn't as completely transferable as it once was, and I'll try to explain that. So when I went to college in the early 80s, when I started college, if you were going to be a creative in advertising and art director, you had to be able to draw. That you don't need to do that anymore. Okay, so anybody who was going to be an art director had to draw. You had to draw. We drew the typefaces, we sketched the typefaces for comps. When we wanted to represent what the photo shoot was going to be, we drew those pictures. So we did that all ourselves. But within 7 years, nobody needed to do that anymore because the computer had displaced that need. Or it had begun to displace it. Some people still drew. So you didn't need to. But now, if you have that skill set that I had when I was young, and let's say it's 2019 and you're entering school and you have that skill set, that's a tool in your toolbox. But that sets you apart from other people because a lot of people don't need it, but you won't have to use it every day. And if you do want to use it every day, then you become an illustrator, a digital illustrator, an animator. So you put those skills to a different use. I'm not saying it's as good or as bad. I just think it's changed.
Yeah, I've when I was working at the office recently, I saw that our top illustrator would use that thing, the Wacom, what is it called? The Wacom board?
Yeah, some people call it a Wacom tablet.
It's like the GIF debate.
Some people say Wacom tablet. I call it Wacom. I don't know which it is. Yeah.
Yes. So I've seen the illustrator at our office. When I would tell her an idea, I was like, I want graphics for this. The first thing she would do is she would visualize it in her head. The second thing she would do is she would sort of draw it on the tablet, and then she would add the layers on top of that. And I see like how using that allows you to, I guess, add more detail than solely relying on, the limitations of, let's just say, the tools on Photoshop. Another question that comes to my mind, because we're on this right now, is, there's this notion about sort of solitude that goes with the foundations of any creative person. And that's something that has been expressed, in the lives of great writers and also artists, right? You need to be in solitude, and you need to find the solace of your own company to come up with great art. But in this rapidly digitized world where, we're rapidly consuming content, and, this cliche buzzword, the content, like I don't even know what an ad is. Everything I see is content, right? So you're getting like this massive consumption economy. Yeah. And you still have the traditional idea of, the artist who lives in solitude, doesn't consume someone else's work. What do you think is the balance? Like, how do you go about that? Because I know when we were in class together, you would show me a bunch of different ads in the Ad Age magazines, and you would constantly consume different ads, like things that were happening all around you. Did that approach help, or like does the other one help?
Well, I think that seeing what other people are doing is critical because it's inspirational. You get inspired by great work. So there's significant value to that. So I think it's important to be aware, but awareness only goes so far. I will tell you that I would spend a lot of time. I wouldn't spend a lot of time looking at creative work. And the reason for that is because when I'm commuting to work, I'm looking at ads. Okay. When I'm sitting at home and I'm watching TV, I'm looking at ads. So I never went to work and like consciously said, well, I'm going to spend an hour looking at great ads or see what ad week is pushed out today. I actually focus on the job at hand. The only time I look at advertising or creativity is when I get stuck and I need to be inspired. I need something to sort of loosen up my brain. And if I feel like I need inspiration, then I'll flip open an actual book, God forbid, right? Because it's still a good thing to do. Like communication arts is the one publication I still subscribe to because they publish the best work in the world every year, and it's worth having at your fingertips versus having to search for it. But that's the only time I'll search for consciously look for advertising. And most of the time when I'm working at an agency, I'm actually focusing on the people around me and the work that they're doing. So the work that my colleagues are doing, the people down the hall, friends on other accounts, like I would typically get inspired by the talent that was inside the agency. And I found the most inspiration right inside the building, not necessarily outside the building.
Which
I don't know if
segues
that,
me.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that answered your question. I think I kind of drifted away from the solitude
All.
piece. If you want me to speak to
Yeah.
the solitude piece, I can do that, which is, and I don't know if this is what you were fishing for, but this is what
All
comes to
tangents are
mind.
welcome because we are in the business of creativity.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer. Like whenever I work as a team, when I'm working with a copywriter, or anybody else, I work alone first. I don't
Mm.
immediately sit down and stare at my partner and think, okay, I'm going to start coming up with ideas. Now watch me. That's too uncomfortable for me. I have to get to a place of confidence that I actually have a few good ideas. So when you talk about the creative and their need for quiet time or privacy or whatever word you want to put on it, intimacy, or an aloneness with thinking, I have to do it all the time. I have to shut all the other disturbances out. And that's where the best ideas come from for me. I'm not the best beginnings of ideas. It doesn't mean that ideas don't get better once you share them with somebody and they begin to evolve. But the beginning of a great idea rarely has ever come from staring at someone else's face.
Yeah, that's so true, because I remember when we were doing the projects for our classes, I did try that approach where I would sit down with a partner in one of the cafes at BU and try to
Yeah.
come up with the ideas together. And there's almost this sort of friction because like you're in this vulnerable spot when you're
Yeah.
coming up with ideas
Yeah.
and you just have no filter. Like I'm the sort of person when I think about ideas, I'm like, the process of elimination, like write down 50 ideas and one of them is great. Just like, and the stuff that comes up often is like stuff deep from the subconscious. And you perceive your partner as this rational judging person who has inhabited a conscious mind, and you're like, no, I can't fly this past them, they might judge me. And like as a result you just get in this sort of lukewarm exchange of ideas, whereas if you both like
Yeah.
worked separately and came in and said like, I have 5, I have 7, and then you shoot down the bad ones and you get the first. I think that's a better approach. Yeah.
So I think your assessment of the interpersonal part of it is really great, and I agree with it. The one time that it becomes different is when you have a very steady creative partner, someone with whom you've worked for a consistent period of time.
Someone who you have synergy with, right?
In which case, those walls come down, and then you can look at that person and say, okay, this idea might suck, but your ability to throw out a shitty idea is actually it's easier when you've worked with someone a lot because you've got skin on the wall, and you've essentially proven to each other that you're worthy of the work, and therefore the process doesn't have the same constrictions that it might when you're a little bit less comfortable with each other.
Right. That's one of the things I also notice about working with strangers, which is, I guess, typical of a college experience in classes where you work with other creatives who you've never met. You just hear their name for the first time, and like someone like you, who's our professor, would say, "Oh, you're paired up with that person. You have to work on this." A lot of that process is basically, at least for me, was trying to build rapport first, because there is no way I could work with the person if I did not know, at least a borderline idea of like what they like, who they are, like where do their sensibilities lie. I was trying to push something as weird as, like let's, I don't know, make an avocado shaped, pencil. I don't know, like, just like weird stuff like that. I have to like meet them halfway and like see where they stand. But what do you think in that sense? Like, what if like I guess this is like we're entering the realm of the delusional creative who's young but lacks the experience of the field. Like, what do you think when you think, and this is not for me, what do you think when you think that you're extremely talented, extremely creative, but other people just don't get your ideas?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that happens that often. I would say that the difference is more that your creative sensibilities are different, right? What you think is funny is not what somebody else thinks is funny. It isn't that so you might have two different senses of humor, for instance. So let's say your partner is more slapstick and over the top, and I tended to be, and so did my partner. We had a much more dry senses of humor. So our thinking doesn't go over as big with people who like slapstick and don't get more intellectual or dry humor. So it's there's two schools of thought. One is your sensibilities should match up, right? Your creative sensibilities should match up. So let's use sense of humor as an example. If your senses of humor match up, then you both can agree on what's funny. And when you can agree on what's funny, you can make the most of that. And for my creative partner and I mean, I met, his name was Ivan, and I've worked with a lot of people over time, but Ivan I worked with for about a dozen years. We both had the same sense of humor. So our idea of what was funny was always the same, and we made the most of it, and we would always laugh at the same thing. So we think, and I believe, that made our work better because we were always chasing the same goal. But here's the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, what if your two senses of humor are different? And I look at my creative partner now as an over-the-top humorist, and I am a drier humorist. The way that can work, and the only way that can work, is if you both respect each other enough that you're willing to trade each other's greatness with each other and say, okay, I'm less comfortable in that space. I'm going to let you lead me, but I can still tell it's funny if it's over the top. And you can still tell it's funny if it's dry. The place it doesn't work is when you both can't understand each other's contrast, if you can't respect each other's contrast. So it can work if you're very different people, but it can't work if you don't have respect. That's when it falls apart. As soon as the respect is gone, the partnership's over and the work it's not good. Somebody steamrolls the other person.
Right. Have you, because I've noticed this certainly, at least in the limited time that I worked in a creative office, there is often a clash of egos involved, at least when it comes to, getting your idea out versus the other person. And I think it's especially true for, let's just say young, ambitious college students, but also young creatives trying to get somewhere. I don't know, because you seem like, and you have been a person who's very warm, very genuine, very endearing, and always playing the bigger person in the room, probably because you're a professor, but also in other cases, how do you deal with that? Because I found that oftentimes these egos kill some great partnerships, great creativity, and sometimes, in great campaigns.
So just compress the question for me.
So what I'm basically asking is, how do you deal with someone who has a massive ego and you have to work with him? Because that's something that tends to happen in the creative field. And I see you nodding there because you've probably been through this.
Yeah. So you can't be successful in the creative field unless you have an ego to begin with. So
really?
No. Yeah. I don't think anybody can be successful in the creative field unless they have an ego, because there's a need to be seen in creatives, right? Most creative people want, their work out there. You're doing a podcast because you want people to hear your voice. You feel like you have something to say. So that's ego, right? But that doesn't mean that it's an out of control ego or an ego that's unchecked. If the question you're asking is what happens when you work with somebody whose ego is so dominant that it's challenging, there's not much you can do about it to fix that. What you have to do is you have to work with everybody that you're given, particularly when you're young in the creative field. You're not going to have a choice over who you work with. The great thing about getting older and earning your stripes is you get to choose more who you work with. But when you're younger, you have no choice. So when you're younger, you might work with a more talented person. You might work with a less talented person. You might work with somebody who's equal to you. And you might work with somebody whose ego is so big that they try to steamroll all your ideas. In a case like that, you're going to have to fight for yourself, but you're going to want to stay the person that you are. The only thing I can, it's that old Shakespeare line is like, be true to yourself no matter what. The one thing I would never do in a situation if I worked with somebody whose ego I felt like was out of control was then say, well, I have to ratchet my personality up to fit that. I wouldn't do that. I would just stay the person that I was, and that's what everybody should do.
But isn't that like sort of also an injunction to get better at what you're doing? Like, you know, when great competition strikes at you, like, isn't that like a chance to level up? You're saying you should stick to your lane and not be bothered by it?
No, yeah. I mean, if you should be the person that you are. I mean, when you have to define what an ego is, but when you say that to me, so when your question is, how do you deal with somebody with a big ego? I translate that as someone who's full of themselves. Okay, so who
I
needs
think that's
the
my definition as well. Yeah.
who needs the light on them, who needs it to be about them. I take the long view of that. I assume that over time, people are going to figure that out. And as long as I stay true to myself and be the better person, I usually will come out on top. You might not win in the early battles, but you'll win the war.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing to explain to a young person, to be patient. The hardest thing. As I'm saying this, even I have pangs of impatience almost every single day when I want to do everything now, and I want to have that same pace forever. It's like, working at max speed, hustling it out, and calling it like some sort of a like I'm this hotshot maverick out to get the world because it's against me, and it's like not even like that. But I would say it's just that there's something about being a young creative that sort of, and there's also people on the other side of the spectrum who take it easy, and within a few years you see them rising out of nowhere. You're like, shit, I've been hustling for the last 10 years going bam, 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 and then all of a sudden this person came out of nowhere. It's like, oh shit, well, they were playing slow and steady and they won the race. But would I, like, this is legit a question because I just want to ask you, like, let's say you had a creative firm, like, dead, I'm just being super honest, would you hire me with knowing the person that I am?
Would I hire you? Yeah, but I would hire you. I would hire you to do. I would hire you to do what I know you're good at, to play to your strengths, because I know, having had you in class, I know what your strengths are, and those are the things that I would take advantage of. I wouldn't put you in a position where I felt like you could fail. So you're a classic new business person because you're fearless. Communication is not a problem for you, right? You'd knock on any door. So I would take agency to say, okay, this is what we stand for. This is what the agency stands for. This is the kind of work we're trying to go get. Now you go get this. You find a way to go get it, because what you had was you had a way with words. You could string a sentence together that felt fresh often. And so that's what I would hire you to do. I wouldn't necessarily hire you today to be a creative person, because when you came out of school, you found that late, and I would say you're not ready to work in my agency with that skill set yet. But from a new business perspective and a handshaking perspective and getting people to become comfortable with a brand, that I know you could do. And
it's funny.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in the space that you're already in. I mean, I'm not surprised you're in the talking to people business. I mean, because that's what it's something that you enjoy, and pondering the questions of the universe, right? So, like, good.
Hey, that's a lot of things you just said about me, and I'm so glad that you would see that, because the funny thing is I did get a job as a business relevant executive. So case in point. But I sort of want to bring this on forward to, I guess, like the nuances of the business, right? Because you have an intuitive sense of what ads are working and what ads don't work. And I think you also have the ability to translate that feeling of what you're feeling, the sense of wonder, to the rest of the class. Like, let's just say you're presenting to a class, right? Is this something that you get good at with experience, or like, I don't know, like, did you just naturally always have this sense of saying, that's a good ad, that's a bad ad? Is it because of your emotions, or what?
So the answer is both, right? So early on in my career, or even before my career, I would watch television and look at commercials like everybody else, and I would see an ad and I'd be like, that's funny, or, oh, that touches me, or, oh, I want that, right? So you're already judging creativity, but you don't know why you're judging it, and you don't know what makes it good, okay? When you see something that's funny, you're just looking at it and reacting to it. You're not thinking about what went into it, why they chose the words that they did, why they shot it the way that they shot it. So Your instincts are your own instincts based on your personality and who you are about what is good creativity. The rest is learned over time. So your ability to look at ads and say, that's a good ad because, and that's a bad ad because, comes through nothing but experience, education, working with talented people, being taught by really talented people what makes a good ad and what makes a bad ad. And then knowing that at the end of the day, as much as you know about it, like 30 plus years in the business, I can look at an ad and say, I don't like that. And here's why I don't like it. Here's why that ad isn't good. People could look at my career and say, he has the credibility to say that. But I disagree with him. I think it's funny. And they'd be right. Everybody's right. Like
you did mention often in class that creativity is subjective.
Totally.
So it doesn't matter if you're like an ad man sitting with other ad men and women and saying, well, we like this ad, we don't like this ad. But at the end of the day, you've realized the end consumer is a far better judge, or like is far more quantitative, has more numbers when it comes to, judging your work, right?
Well, so the end consumer is the ultimate judge. What you have to hope if you want to be successful in this business as a creative is that your basic instincts about what makes great creative messaging are also the instincts of the consumer at large. So in other
this idea of being,
So in other words, when I did my best work, right, when I thought I was doing my best work, if that work succeeded, it was an indicator that my instincts were the instincts of the consumer at large. And that's when you're successful, is when all you have to do is think for yourself and everybody responds. It's when your instincts don't work that you're in trouble, because then you have to think like somebody else and then it all goes to hell.
I've never thought of it like that. Never in my life. I always thought that there's a me that I have to put out, but then there's also I have to think like the person consuming it. And I think that's sort of relevant considering that, we do live in an age where packaging is almost just as important as the content piece. But that's a really interesting way to think about it.
So do you have The Voice in India? The show, The Voice?
The Voice?
Yeah,
Is that a podcast?
No, The Voice is like it's a talent show where people come on to sing songs and like the judges judge whether they're good or they're not.
Oh, yeah. So you guys have American Idol. We do have Indian Idol, if that's the same format you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. So you have something like that. So when you watch a show like that, you'll very often hear the judges say to the person, "You're just singing the song. I don't feel what you're singing," right? So even in that space, that's a creative space. Singing is creative. What the judges are saying is you're not personalizing it. You're not giving me, you're just being technical or tactical about singing a song. So creativity is like that. In order for it to stand out, there has to be a level of intimacy to it. So when a songwriter writes a song, they're not writing that song for a million people. They're writing it for themselves or for someone who broke their heart. It's always aimed at a single person. But when that song becomes successful, it's successful because the consumers at large respond to the emotion of that one song, that one moment, that one message to that one person. And the same goes for books. When you write a book, Stephen King wasn't writing a book to scare the shit out of you and me. He was writing a book to scare the shit out of himself. Ultimately, in the end, what he thinks is scary is what we also thought was scary. So if you translate that into creativity and advertising, it's no different. When you're successful at it, you're not writing an ad for your client. You're not writing an ad for the consumer at large. You're writing a version of creativity that you respond to, that you think is funny, that you think is meaningful. It just like you would write a book or a song. And if your instincts are right, it works. If your instincts are wrong, it doesn't work. But you can't write for a million people. You can only write for one.
That is a crazy hot take. When you were saying that, I was just thinking to myself, if only I knew this in college, I I would have written some tasty ads for you, because I was always
You
thinking,
did know.
So, I mean, I would think like, so I'm in the USA. How do people in the USA think? And then like, how do people my age think? And then how does Professor Gould think? A lot of it was just, trying to, I guess not all of it, but a significant part of it was trying to appease to the audience's psyches.
Yep.
But I always felt that what you're sort of saying, if I can distill it, is something like, you have to go to the spot where you're vulnerable and say like, this is what I think is cool or funny, and then put it out, which is sort of scary because, there's parts of you that you sort of hide. And there's parts of you that are like weird and quirky, like it's like when a supermodel confesses she loves to play video games. And you're like, what? That's weird, right? But then it's like, yeah, it's a part of her. And then all of a sudden, everyone else loves video games because she's owned that part of herself and put it out in a creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So given the message that you're trying to push across here, what I will tell you, and it's funny because you did know this stuff because I did say it in class on occasion, and I'm sure you heard it and just don't. But sometimes it becomes meaningful to you later too. But the reason I articulate it that way is I didn't figure that out quickly. I spent the better part of the first 10 years of my career trying to come up with ideas that I thought would make great ads. Okay, so, and in other words, I was thinking for what I had seen. I was measuring against what other people thought were great ads, what I thought were great ads, and I was trying to replicate what I had seen. When I started to become successful was when I stopped thinking about what other people had done and asked myself what I would do. What would I think was funny? What would I think was meaningful? But the trick in advertising and creativity is doing that against a positioning statement. So you don't get to just make up any rule that you want, right? You don't get to say, I think this is funny, ergo this is the ad. You have to say, I think this is funny to me personally, and to me, I would laugh at this against this very specific message that the client wants to send, which is our XYZ is the fastest, our XYZ is the most expensive and you should buy it, it never breaks, right? Whatever their message is, it's what's funny against that message. So you still have to be accurate in your messaging. When I tell people like, when I send a message through like a podcast like this and I say, you have to say what's funny to you, it doesn't mean you don't get to play by the rules. You have to be funny by the rules. But it's your funny. It's not someone else's funny. Yeah.
It's like you don't have to be a rebellious rock star that does his own thing, and you still have to play within the rules and then tweak it just a little bit to make that genius happen. The one question that kept coming to me, and this was posed by a lot of people, is often there's all these memes online talking about how you as a creative, there's like a graph where you as a creative push an idea and you put 100% behind it, the client says no. Then you come back and you push 100% behind it, the client says maybe. So you start off with 1 point, like an idea that you think is phenomenal, and then by the end, it's usually a I'm not going to say happy medium, because it's certainly not happy for you, because it's like, oh shit, that was my baby, and now I have this other mutated child. Not always, but sometimes it's like a negotiation between what the client wants and what you want. That's a very frustrating process, and that's something that I've also noticed whenever I have worked in that limited capacity. Is there like a solution to that, or is that just like the nature of the business?
No, it's the nature of the business. I mean, I think ultimately you have to know that you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and then there's going to be some where it's going to be in the middle. And so, when you lose, you lick your wounds and you get back up and you do better the next time. But if you want to win more often, then you have to understand your client. You have to understand everything about their business, because when you come up with an idea, the way to get a client on board with your thinking is to convince them that it's going to be good for their business. And you can't make that shit up. You have to be able to take them on a walk through your presentation where it's logical circle and it all adds up to them and it makes sense, because the best work takes a chance, and by their nature, most clients don't like to take chances, because taking a risk and failing means losing their job. Put yourself in their chair. You put yourself in a client's chair where some creative comes to you and says, I want to do this thing, and you're like, oh, that's kind of out there. And the creative's excited about it, but what you're thinking about is, that sounds good, but if it fails and I lose my job, my family's not eating. I can't make my mortgage payment. So you have to have empathy for the client to understand that their business is the goal of their business is always the same thing. It's to grow. So you have to ask yourself, how is this idea not just good, but how is it going to succeed at growing their business? And that's where the best creatives live, is the ones who not only can do great work, but who can convince the client that it's the right thing for their business. And that's why there isn't that much great work out there, because you have to have all of those things. You have to have a great client, you have to have a great creative and account team, and then a great client, a great creative team, a great account team, right? And strategy is also included in that, in order to be consistently successful. Great work can happen by accident on occasion, but it happens on a consistent basis when the client, the agency, and the team involved all understand the mission. And that's when it's consistently good, when they all agree what great is. But I often say this, I mean, I can't imagine how many times it's out there, but you have to, somebody said this to me once, I thought it was brilliant. He said, the client says they want great work. Well, the response to that is, who doesn't? Like, whoever walked in and said, I want a shitty ad, well, or a mediocre ad. No one says that. Nobody says, I want a shitty ad or I want a mediocre ad. So why are there so many shitty ads, and why are there so many mediocre ads? It's because the client or the creative team's definition of great is not the same.
Yeah.
Everybody
Everybody
thinks that the ad that they've done is great. No one walks into a meeting and says, give me something middling. They say, no, I want something great. But what you have to figure out is, what does the client mean by that? What's the definition of great for them? And you typically find that out by seeing the work that they've done in the past. Everybody leaves a trail, I mean, people can say, like, if, I think a lot of the work that I've done is great. I think some of the work that I've done is shit, but I only put the best work forward. But other people might look at my work and say, oh, half of it's good and half of it sucks. There's nothing I can do about that, but my definition of what's good is right there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're getting at here is something like, having open communication between the creative and the client, and really getting into the nitty-gritties of what it means, what they mean by the idea of great, right? Because oftentimes what happens is we do work based on reputation alone, and we do work based on chemistry alone, not getting down to the sort of unpleasant and like unglamorous part of like what do you exactly need, and like driving hour-long conversations just to figure it out. Because I'm like a person who likes to ask a lot of questions before I start anything. Because if I deliver on something that I think is awesome, and the client is like, oh, I wanted something else in blue, it's like, oh shit, well, I'm fucked then. But sort of coming to the idea of what do you look for? I know this is a complete different tangent, but what do you look for when you look at a young creative? Like, what are the skills that you look for?
Well, so it's always the book first. The
book as in your portfolio?
Portfolio, yeah. I mean, we look at the portfolio before we look at the human. So if we look at the work, has to be good. It has to be the kind of work that we're looking for. And then if we like it, then we'll bring him or her, and then the interview process takes over from there. I mean, I often tell people, if you get called in for an interview and you've already shared your book, they already think you have talent. Now you're out to prove you're not an asshole and you're smart. So your interview is about proving what a good human being you are and how you can work with a team It's not about your talent level. Your portfolio has already answered that. Now, they might ask you some technical questions about your software ability or what were you thinking when you did this work. But most of the time when you're called in for an interview, it's because they've already judged your work. Now they're judging you. So you got to have your shit wired tight when you go into an interview.
The one thing that you mentioned sort of again and again is software skills in Adobe. What I think that is fascinating about you is that you're super adaptable, considering that you've had a career of 35 years. I see like you're one of the first people who recommended LinkedIn Learning to me to learn in full-fledged courses around Adobe and pretty much everything around marketing. But you've had your roots in a very traditional creative environment. So how the hell have you been able to still catch up and not only just catch up, but thrive in a place that is so rapidly evolving?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, and it's because it's an adapt or die business. The answer is pretty simple. If you refuse to adapt to what is happening to the business, it's going to be over for you quicker than you want it to be. I'm not saying that everything I've done or had to learn I've always wanted to do, particularly as you get older. You're like, oh my God, I've got to learn yet another software platform or how another social media platform works. That can be exhausting over time. I think when you're young, it's exciting. But when you've been working for 25 years and the business just keeps changing and even faster, I think it's tough. But if you understand that your success, your ability to continue to do what you do is reliant upon your understanding of what's changing, then you have to change too.
Wow. I think that applies still to the people who are still young, even now. I think most of us get caught up in trying to get a lot of followers or trying to max out one platform, forgetting that like stuff like LinkedIn. So apparently, what's interesting about LinkedIn is no one took LinkedIn seriously in college because the custodians of LinkedIn happen to be the career services people at Com, and it's it seemed like such a rigid platform to be on. But I've been using LinkedIn just for B2B stuff, and I make a funny graphic around podcasting. I make a meme on LinkedIn, and it has insane views, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? And it's also acting,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict who's going to succeed and who's going to fail in the social space, because if you go back in history and read about Vine, you'll hear nothing about what a big deal that was going to be, and that's already come and gone. But LinkedIn has managed to adapt. I mean, and that's kind of the thread we're on here, which is adapt or die. I think LinkedIn started out as this great sort of mobile Rolodex, but it's now become a network of sharing intellectual property and information. And hey, here's what we've done lately. And it has different value to different consumers. It's now a job search. It's a career site as well. So I think that they've grown from a super smart. And when they bought lynda.com, they also entered the educational space, which is, so they've managed to get their tendrils into a lot of different places. And I mean, I actually find, colleagues who still post their most interesting stuff on Facebook that's related to business. And I always am like, well, why are you posting your business stuff on Facebook? It's like the better place, you get more traction on LinkedIn. It's a much more compelling spot for anything that's thoughtful in the business space. So.
I know that you have to go, so I'm just going to wrap up with 2 more questions.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you about 10 more minutes, maybe.
That works. You have worked on the very awesome Anheuser-Busch ad. Did I pronounce that right?
2.
2, yes, 2. So one of that. So you worked for both of them. Oh yeah, the one with
2 Super Bowls, yeah.
Yes, 2 Super Bowl ads. One of them is the top first in the top 50 ad age list for Super Bowl ads, and the second one is number 2nd in the ad meter list. Did I get that right?
So one of them, so the September 11th spot is in ad age is number 4.
It's number 1.
No. In Ad Age's list of the top 50 Super Bowl spots in the 50-year history of advertising, it's number 4. So it's
okay.
So it's in the top 5. That one is. The other spot that we did which was the zebra in the replay booth, and that one's called Replay.
That was really funny.
That one won the USA Today Super Bowl ad meter. So in that particular year, it was the top ad in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And that one wound up on USA Today's list in the top 5 in this 50-year history of Super Bowl advertising.
Yeah, I really had that messed up and wrong in my head. But irrespective of that, what I wanted to talk to you about in that thread is what's like the best brands that you worked on, like any 3, any 2. And this is a sort of very buzzwordy question, but I figured I'd put that in as well.
Well, I mean, I couldn't, I can't leave Anheuser-Busch off the list just because they weren't afraid to take risks. That's the business, they were great marketers for a long time because they took long chances with their creativity, and they experimented with creativity a lot. So that was certainly one of them. At the time, and it's not a brand that people talk about anymore because they've been bought by another company and their advertising isn't nearly as visible or strong anymore as John Hancock. So at the time that we were managing that piece of business, the goal, the actual goal of their advertising was to, shake people loose. And the CEO wanted people to both love it and hate it, because he knew that if the audience, some of them loved it and some hated it, then he'd sent a message that was resonating with people. What scared him more than anything was nothing, no reaction. So it was a great brand to work on because there was so much pressure to do work that not only consumers remembered, but also that the industry talked about. And that with that pressure comes stress, but at the same time, you're always working to be the best. And I think ultimately, ultimately that's your, that's what you want.
Professor Doug Gould, what advice do you have for young creatives?
Advice for young.
And creatives. I know you did that sigh, but you give this out at the end of every semester and all the creativity classes that you teach. I don't think you consciously think about it, but I think it's something that comes out naturally because you do have that sort of presence where you want to enable the next generation of us mad people to do something great.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is you have to want to be great, and you have to. So that requires some of your own personal drive and belief. So you have to be relentless, but you have to be humble too. So you have to be both of those things. We've talked about adaptability. I think people have to be willing to adapt. You have to be true to your own brand, and you have to be driven. I mean, I think that, you know this because you were in my classes, but nobody else, very few other people know it. I was an average student, and, in art school, and I was average for the first 5 or 7 years of my career. I was, doing okay work, but inside of me, I wanted to be great every day. I wanted to be great. And I understood that I was growing, but I still wasn't great. So the most important thing is, for any young creative, is to stay motivated, to stay driven, to not give up, because you don't know when success is coming for you. There's too many people who think it's going to come in the first 6 months of their job. It isn't necessarily. It might take 6 years, it might take 16 years. But if you're built like most successful people, you have something inside you that motivates you to be great. And as long as you have that, you have a chance. That's the most important thing. Talent will carry you so far, but motivation and drive will take you further.
Professor Doug Gould, it has been an absolute honor hosting you on this podcast. Through Skype, I still commend the lovely world that we live in now, where it's possible to communicate like this. Remember the time when people were happy about email and how you can chat with someone across the world? Yeah. We're sitting in 2019 now, and it's Skype. But listeners, this is Professor Doug Gould, my mentor, the guy who said, hey, you can be great. And he gave me the tools to be great in advertising. Where can people find you if they want to communicate with you?
Well, they can find me on Instagram at hang on a second, I have to look.
I have your username.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
Doug Adu. Yeah, it's
At Doug Adu.
Dougadoo. Yeah.
At Doug Adu, and you can find me on Twitter at Doug Gould 1, where I rant against the current president of the United States because
Oh, yeah.
I think he's a bad human being. So be careful there. If you don't want to read that, don't go on. And the last thing I'll say to your listeners has nothing to do with creativity. It has everything to do with fight for the environment, fight for climate change. It's the most important thing in the world today. We're on this little blue ball all by ourselves. We have nobody else but each other, and we need to get past the differences between us and galvanize to clean up the mess that we've created. And you can use creativity to do that, by the way. But don't forget to do it, because I think we're heading down a pretty ugly path, and only all of us can fix it, because we've created the problem.
Wow. I was sitting at the sea yesterday, by the sea, and it's in Mumbai, where it's famous for the trash on the beaches.
Yeah.
And it was my second time there, and I was meditating, and I opened my eyes, and like a stray slipper, a plastic bottle cap, someone's bra, like shit like that was all at my feet, and the sea was just putting out more and more stuff. I'm like, this is the world we're living in, And I think your message is relevant and timely.
So take that one phrase that you just spit out, which was, I was sitting at a beach which is famous for its trash, right?
See, that's the thing I love about it. You can like notice the sublime in these moments and make something beautiful. But thank you so much, Professor Gould. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, good to see your face again, and good luck with your podcast and everything else. Go get them.
Thank you.
Take it easy.